Hello and welcome. I'm Jeremy Strick, Director of the Nasher Sculpture Center. We're so glad all of you can join us for Nasher Prize Dialogues, Disembodied Intimacy, Digitally Communicating Art, Caregiving, and Sex, our first virtual dialogues event. While these talks are usually held in person at locations around the world involving myriad voices and perspectives on contemporary sculpture, as is the mission of the Nasher Prize, the unique circumstances of this pandemic year keep us from traveling. But these restrictions can't limit the reach of this event. We're delighted that we have so many viewers today from all around the world: the UK, Germany, Belgium, Sweden, Colombia, Mexico, and more. It's reassuring to know that even as so much is off limits to us in this moment, we're lucky to be able to connect with each other in this way, digitally, however abstract that can seem. Digital communication is, in fact, the substance of today's talk, and I want to thank its participants: artists Emmanuel Van der Auwera, Mika Rottenberg, and Jacoby Satterwhite, as well as design critic and author Alice Rawsthorn. We are sorry that digital art advisor Jaja Fay is not able to join us today as planned due to unforeseen circumstances. I also want to express gratitude to sponsors of this event: the Hartland and Mackey family, Janelle and Alden Pennell, the Pennell Foundation, and Kristen and Derek Wilson, and of course, to our partner in this event, Hauser and Wirth. We're so pleased to have your support for this important discussion. Lastly, we're thrilled to have Randy Kennedy steer today's conversation as moderator. Randy Kennedy is a writer, editor, and curator. His first novel, Presidio, about a wandering car thief in West Texas, was published in 2018 by Simon & Schuster. For 25 years, he was a reporter for the New York Times, more than half of that time writing about the art world. He is now editor-in-chief of the art magazine Ursula, published by the gallery Hauser and Wirth, and he serves as the gallery's Director of Special Projects. Randy, thanks so very much, and I pass the virtual baton to you.
Thanks, Jeremy. I'm very happy to be here, and it's probably, appropriate to say that here in this case is in my house in Brooklyn, and we're all five of us coming to you from, I think mostly from our houses and studios around the world. I wanted to just start off very quickly. It's always with this many panelists and who have this much to bring, it's often hard to get all these thoughts into 1 hour. But I just wanted to set the stage briefly by talking about art's relation to technology, which at least since the 19th century, but of course, going back to Leonardo and earlier, has been a pairing of kindred inquiries into the natural world. And those inquiries sort of began to diverge as technology progressed. By the 19th century, I remember reading that Coleridge wrote that he attended the lectures of the great chemist Humphrey Davy in London, quote, to enlarge my stock of metaphors. And so science and technology had become, in other words, a kind of a tool and a subject of art. And there were times up through the 20th century, flowering in the late 60s in collaborations like Experiments in Art and Technology with artists like Rauschenberg and Yvonne Rainer in collaboration with Bell Labs, when artists and engineers tried to return to sort of more common ground, but technology still seemed to be mostly a supplier of metaphors, still a subject. But now, 20 years into the 21st century, I think it's safe to say that it's less of a subject and more of a basic substrate that's closer to human consciousness itself for artists and for writers. And now, ironically, the biological, specifically the viral world, has catapulted us at great speed, without our consent, much further into a digital existence. Even 5 years ago, technology wouldn't have allowed us to work and live as effectively, this virtually, as we all are right now. And COVID hasn't only put us there, but it's shown us in just 7 months how rapidly the capability for us all to live almost fully in such a world is progressing. this talk and all the others that we've been part of show us that we're all swimming in Zoom tanks, or more accurately, we're individual fish swimming in individual Zoom tanks that grid up on our screens. And so today we'll be talking in part about how these individual tanks can be made into more human, empathetic, sympathetic, and even erotic spaces with these four great speakers who are artists, filmmakers, thinkers, writers, designers, many of them, all of those descriptions sort of wrapped into one. And so I'll start off before they make their individual presentations, just quickly introducing all of them. Starting with Mika Rottenberg. Argentina-born and New York-based, Mika combines film, architectural installation, and sculpture to explore ideas including labor, the human body, and the production of value in a late capitalist world. She was born in Buenos Aires in 1976 and spent her formative years in Israel, and then moved to the U.S. when she earned a BA from SVA in New York and an MFA at Columbia in 2004. She's had solo museum exhibitions at the MCA in Chicago, the New Museum in New York, and many other places, and was the recipient last year of the Kurt Schwitter's Prize, which recognizes artists who made a significant contribution to the field of contemporary art. Emmanuel Van der Auwera lives and works in Brussels through filmmaking, video, sculpture, theater, printmaking, and other media. He sets up encounters with found images that question our visual literacy by dissecting how images are engineered, mastering special industry techniques, and intervening in their protocol. He was the laureate in 2015 of the Higher Institute for Fine Arts post-academic course in Ghent, and the 2015 Langley Award recipient of the Young Belgian Art Prize. And his work has been featured in many places, the Pompidou, the Palais de Tokyo, Ars Electronica, and Linz. And he has a forthcoming book, monograph, A Certain Amount of Clarity, published by Mercator Funds and Yale University Press, which is due out later this year. Jacolby Satterwhite is celebrated for a conceptual practice that looks at themes of labor and consumption and carnality and fantasy through immersive installation, virtual reality, and digital media. He uses a range of software to produce intricately detailed animations and live action film of real and imagined worlds populated by avatars of his artists and his friends. Originally from South Carolina, he received his BFA from the Maryland Institute College of Arts in Baltimore and his MFA from the University of Pennsylvania. His work has been also presented in numerous exhibitions, most recently at the Fabric Workshop and Museum in Philadelphia, Pioneer Works in New York, the Whitechapel Gallery, the Museum of Modern Art, the New Museum, many others. And his current show, We Are in Hell When We Hurt Each Other, is on view at Mitchell, Ennis, and Nash in New York until the end of this month. And finally, Alice Rawsthorn is an award-winning design critic and the author of many critically acclaimed books on design, including Hello World, Where Design Meets Life, and most recently, Design as an Attitude. An influential public speaker and social media commentator on design, she's participated in important global events, including the annual meetings of the World Economic Forum in Davos in Switzerland. She's based in London, where she's the chair of the boards of trustees of the Chisenhale Gallery and the Hepworth Wakefield Art Gallery in Yorkshire. She was awarded an OBE for services to design in the arts and is a founding member of the Writers for Liberty campaign for human rights and freedoms. And then more to the point for this discussion today, she's a co-founder with Paola Antonelli at the Museum of Modern Art of the Design Emergency Project to investigate design's response to the COVID crisis and its aftermath. And that's the project about which she will be speaking today. So all four of our panelists are going to make short presentations, starting with Mika showing a piece from a recent work of hers. And so what we'll do is go through those presentations, many of which will show you what these artists and filmmakers and designers do, And then once those are over, we'll have a talk, and then we'll take your questions through Zoom chat. So we'll start with Mika. Mika, I think you might be
unmute. Yeah.
Okay, you're with us now.
Yes, good.
We hear you.
In voice and body.
In voice and body. Right. Somebody.
So we're gonna see the first 3 minutes of Spaghetti Blockchain, which is a piece I completed in 2019, worked on 18, 19. That's the first 3 minutes out of 18 minutes or so. I don't see it. Okay.
So that was the beginning of Mika's work, Spaghetti Blockchain. And now I would like to move on to Emmanuel, who will introduce his presentation.
Thank you, Randy. So the extract that we're going to see is two pieces of two films that I made, one in 2018, Wake Me Up at 4:20, and one from 2019, The Sky is on Fire, who both deal with, I guess, material that I've gathered online. The first one turned around a suicide meme that is becoming an urban legend online. The second one is an investigation of the aftermath of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting in the outskirts of Miami, recreating a digital landscape. Yeah, let's launch the film, I guess.
people hate that. But yeah, it's still, the world is still gonna be around, man. This park is still gonna be here 300 years from now. You know what I'm saying? This park will be here. It might not be open, you know what I mean? But it'll be here. You know what I'm saying? So don't worry. You know what I mean? None of it's going anywhere. Your cities, your house you live in. You know, yeah, your house is going to be falling apart 100 years from now. Then they're going to renovate it. Whoever lives there 100 years from now. You know, it's all still going to be here. You know, no, it's not going to be lost. You know what I mean? You think this is all temporary. You know, no, we are temporary. You know what I mean? But what we do is permanent.
This is another extract. So it's not what I was talking about. This is more general presentation of my work. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I think in that sense, I mean, it gave people a sense of what your work looks like. So I think now we should move on to Jacolby and his presentation. Jacolby, you are muted.
Hi. So I took the term presentation very, very literally and made an actual presentation of me talking about the work composited behind me. So I'm presenting a narrative arc of basically my trajectory leading up to today in relationship to the theme that we are having in this panel.
Okay.
Hi. Welcome to my pre-recorded Zoom lecture. I'm going to start with a video that is composited behind me in Premiere Pro. It's called The Matriarch's Rhapsody. This video is sort of the codex or the conceptual foundation for all of my ideas and how I kind of navigate world building. So what you're looking at are the drawings on the left. The drawings on the left are made by my mother, Patricia Satterwhite. When I was a kid, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia and went into this feverish kind of habit of making drawings that were originally intended to kind of get my family out of poverty. My father lost his job when I was a very young child, and she thought that making schematic diagrams of common objects around the house that were basically banal utilitarian inventions, she thought these inventions would be sent to the Home Shopping Network or paid programs, and they would invent them and we would prosper. And as a kid, that was very, very inspiring for me. I wanted to use her drawing utensils that my dad bought for her, her crayons and her glitter crayons and markers and all that stuff. And she would say, Jacoby, you would have to learn how to draw if you want to be my studio assistant. So I learned how to draw. So basically what you're looking at are these weird, poetic Gertrude Stein-like text prompts next to these crystallized objects, and in the center are CGI renderings of those objects, and on the right are family photographs that contain that material culture that inspired those objects. You know, I've studied painting for like 15 years, and when I had a roadblock with the medium, I decided that, you know, I needed to go to something more personal, and I needed to think about a performance practice that kind of was rooted in surrealist and Dada and Fluxus tendencies. And the way that I would do that is to use the drawings that my mother made as surrealist scores and prompts that help me navigate the way that I think about spontaneity and think about basically just the text was a way for me to randomize the way that I like conceptually navigate and build ideas and worlds. So that's when we proceed to the video Country Ball 1989 to 2012. This was the first successful execution of the ongoing collaboration between my mother's archive, my performance practice, and the archive that I kind of generate from collecting green screen performances for my own body and others, and also outsourcing found footage from the internet and for my own private archive of VHS tapes. Country Ball was sort of like my way of making an impressionist painting of a landscape that was captured on VHS camera. And then the way that I would paint that landscape was through Maya, a CGI rendering program. It was my way of thinking about en plein air, like sitting down with the canvas and live and re-performing, repainting, recapturing a moment in live action. I was obsessed with the home footage originally because of the post-structuralist ideas rooted in them, where you can see a lot of like gender performance that you can see my early gender performance as a 3-year-old, me wanting to navigate and perform like my female cousins and my female family members, and then my family, from a blue-collar family, trying to reorient me to my male cousins and make me more like macho and not kind of conform to that. So I thought it would be more elegant to kind of explore something more foundational in the video, which was like, what are my family dancing and performing around? What are the consumerist objects that kind of, you know, kept this event afloat? The pots, the pans, the KFC buckets, the picnic tables, the Mercedes Benz, the trampolines, all the things that my mother would feverishly draw throughout the night trying to get invented, you know, were basically relics from these cherished memories. And so I thought, okay, if I'm working conceptually from observation, I should take these very intimate objects that my mother drew, trace them, build them architecturally in Maya, and composite 35 of those objects into Maya, and I'm going to reanimate this VHS tape using my body 35 times. I sewed 35 costumes that were like neon 80s Technicolor, and basically did a modernist dance piece that echoed the dance rhythms and styles of my family, to try to reclaim that memory, to try to like have agency over that time. And that was a breakthrough moment for me conceptually as an artist. So fast forwarding a few years down the line, I created a few series at the Country Ball, like Reifying Desire and then Birds in Paradise. Birds in Paradise series was initially a commission from the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, where I made a hour-long concept album derived from an archive of cassette tapes recorded by my mother. She wanted to make 155 acapellas that were jingles for commercials and pop songs. I felt like these were great American folk song recordings, and they were also lyrical prompts for me to storyboard animation narratives. And so I basically spent 2 years with a friend of mine, Nick Weiss. We went deep into Pro Tools and Ableton and made this lush trip-hop electronic music landscape that I felt would assist me in bringing back the sculptural elements of sound back. I wanted to figure out, how could I make an album an object again? How can I make a virtual reality experience related to a sonic experience? And so moving forward, the final chapter of that series was called We Are in Hell When We Hurt Each Other, which was echoing the sentiments of Country Ball, a new kind of even more dystopian pastoral concert that kind of inverts Manet's Luncheon in the Grass, which was controversial and for painting the middle class on a large scale. Instead of reserving it for the divine, I wanted to like invert that concept and make my version of Luncheon in the Grass in a post-pandemic, post-apocalyptic, postmodern era where Black female figures are autonomous and immune to biological threats. And so while I was making this film this year during the quarantine and the lockdown, I couldn't help but react to the environment around me, which was filled with
Did we lose the last part of that video?
That's weird. Well, it was about to end anyway.
Do you want to just sort of end that thought?
Well, I was basically saying that when I was making the video, there were lots of protests and civil unrest outside, and I went outside with my GoPro and my camera and my iPhone, and I was recording a lot of the protests that was geared towards trans rights and Breonna Taylor's murder. And I kind of felt like it was a different kind of en plein air observational painting kind of CGI experiment where I took that footage back into my studio and I created that dystopian pastoral concert reflecting the time. I mean, most of my pieces are very zeitgeist oriented and a simulacra of like whatever I'm observing, and I bring my body and my CGI animation skills and figure out a way to interpret it, and it becomes a sculptural installation, which you can see now at Mitchell and Nash Gallery in Chelsea.
Right. Okay. Thanks a lot. And then what we'll do, Alice will give her presentation, which will, as I understand it, kind of take us back to infancy in a manner of speaking, and then we'll loop quickly back to Emmanuel, because I think we lost a little bit of his presentation, and we'll go back to that, and then we'll start to talk. So Alice, take it away.
Thank you, Randy. And after that incredible example of, sorry, I'm just going to share properly. Can you let me know, is that okay?
I'm not seeing, for a second I saw a text panel, but I'm not seeing anything right now.
Okay. I'll go back. Your tech team actually have my presentation if they want to come in and manipulate it, but I'll try sharing in the conventional way.
Okay, now I'm seeing the text panel again for Design Emergency.
Great. So is that all right? Are the tech team happy with it?
Yeah, I think we're fine.
Okay. So after that incredible adventure by Jacoby through his imagination and through his work, I'm going to talk about something which, as Randy said, takes us straight back to infancy, but is also super pragmatic. And all my work is about trying to champion a different attitude to design, refuting the stylistic and promotional stereotypes of it as a commercial tool, and redefining it as an agent of change that can help us to tackle some of the most urgent political, social, ecological, cultural, and technological challenges of our time. So when COVID-19 struck, as Randy has said, I co-founded Design Emergency, which is an Instagram research platform, with a friend and fellow design nut, Paola Antonelli, who's Senior Curator of Architecture and Design at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. We started in May with a series of weekly IG Lives with the people who we believed were at the forefront of design innovation in the COVID relief effort. So this included public information programs, PPE for frontline health and social care workers, data dashboards, trackers, tracers, and visualizations to chart the spread of infection, and networks of community volunteers to support and protect their vulnerable neighbors. And of course, the symbolism and iconography of the pandemic. We've since focused Design Emergency on the future by interviewing the people who we believe will be the global design leaders of the redesign and reconstruction of our lives post-pandemic. And this covers everything from reinventing social welfare, justice and healthcare systems, to diffusing the housing crisis and the climate emergency. Now, the design projects we've explored are dramatically different in their scale, typologies and objectives, and also in their relationship to intimacy, whether it's digitally disembodied or not. And for this debate, we were asked to consider the ways in which digital technology can either enrich or stymie important physical acts. And so I want to discuss an example of a phenomenon that has become increasingly important through, sorry, I can't actually manipulate the screen. Here we go. I want to discuss an example of a phenomenon that's accelerated during the pandemic, the use of robotics and other forms of artificial intelligence in our care of one another. Now, of course, the extreme demands of the medical treatment of COVID have accelerated the use of robotics and frontline health and social care, but I want to focus on a domestic example of neuromorphic care, one that's proving highly contentious by seeming enriching to some but stymieing to others. And it is this seemingly uncontroversial baby's cot or crib, the snoo. Could you bring up the next image, please? Brilliant. Here is the snoo. So if you look at it, it looks like a rather swish, but inauspicious baby's crib. It's actually a robotic crib that was designed by the San Francisco design group Fuse Project in collaboration with Dr. Harvey Karp, who's a prominent US pediatrician. And the snoo predated the pandemic. It was launched in 2016, but sales have soared during it. As a smart crib, it combines sensors, robotics, and other forms of AI to soothe babies to sleep, or so it claims, by monitoring their behavior and swaddling, shushing, or rocking them as required. It's also intended to reduce the risk of cot death by holding infants in safe sleeping positions to prevent them from rolling over and suffocating. And you can see how this baby is held in by the white harness. The theory is that the babies will benefit from higher quality sleep, and so will their carers, who otherwise risk sleep deprivation if they're awoken by the crying of a grouchy infant or the stress of worrying about cot death. Yves Bahar, who's the founder of Fuse Project, is so confident about it that his own kids have slept in it as babies, but not everyone believes it's in a child's best interest for their sleeping patterns to be dictated by AI. When I first posted about the snoo, some people loved the idea, describing it as fantastic, brilliant, and so on, but others criticized it as being cruel, scary, and terrifying. They even accused it of child abuse. Its admirers welcome the idea of deploying technologies to help babies sleep soundly, but exactly the same prospect appalled its critics. Some of them doubted that technology could care for infants as well as humans and were outraged by the implicit suggestion that it might. Others recalled happy memories of soothing their own babies to sleep and felt that fellow parents and carers would be foolish to deny that pleasure to themselves and their kids. Many of the snooze detractors also voiced concerns that robotic cribs could encourage sloppy parenting, whereas its admirers claim the opposite, that they say the opposite could happen by reducing sleep deprivation among carers and protecting babies even if their carers are exhausted, ill, looking after lots of other kids at the same time, maybe even drunk. By introducing artificial intelligence to childcare and the intensely intimate experience of rocking a child to sleep, which obviously is a field where passions run understandably high, the snoo has proved deeply divisive, enriching to some and stymieing or worse to others. And like so many design applications of AI, and now it's increasingly ubiquitous in our life, we're going to see this happening again and again. The snoo challenges us by prompting us to reassess our beliefs, by presenting us with a moral quandary, about the way we wish to live and the degree to which we want to cede control of our most intimate experiences to technology. Thank you.
Thank you for that. It is an image that it's hard to know what to think about right off the bat. I wanted to circle back quickly to Emmanuel because I think that we might have just a little bit more of what we didn't see earlier of the work that he was talking about.
Yeah, sure. So I'll try to summarize a little bit of this short film that we saw, where there is several work of mine compiled together in this teaser. So there is some element of work called video sculpture in there, which are sculpture that I do by removing and peeling the filter that is on top of an LCD screen with a knife, tearing, in fact, the image that we can see apart and revealing a kind of a white light that is the kind of primal state of every image in a smartphone or on a computer that we engage with. So it's really something that that's funny that the AI of my computer is now triggered by erotically. But yeah, so it's a gesture that a kind of gesture of symbolic violence to the screen, kind of tearing apart the window and maybe deconstructing the illusion that it creates, that come and can be tracked down to a very important work of mine called A Certain Amount of Clarity, in which teenagers were looking for real on the internet at a real murder video. Somebody wants me to to have a tough time, okay. But yeah, so this film was from 2014, and it was about a ritual online where people are actually looking at a real murder video and recording their emotional response to it and posting it online. It was a trend in the 2014, and I guess this is really what opened up the full body of work that I'm engaged right now, like all the questions of it. The kind of ethical dilemma or the impossible dilemma that happen when we look from the safe distance of a screen through the mediation of image, unaware of the technological process that is, the magic that is taking place, but also the strong illusion. So from this film to this community online of people inventing new subculture, I'm talking about this reaction video, but later on I've been engaged with material coming from suicide trends to also, I guess, the propaganda of ISIS, which was also an image that was challenging a convention when it happened. And for example, with the video of ISIS, I've been using technology that enable a very strong AI that enable to track the audience eyes, the audience gaze as the image is being played. These technology are now used to record, basically, or to understand better the consumer. So these are technology that now are in the public domain, and I guess that with the corona pandemic, this will get much more mainstream. So through this few examples, I try to describe my relation to image, to the empathy, to the experience of the viewer, to the act of responsibility in the act of seeing, the necessity of growing a new consciousness, of being a global spectator, specifically now in the age of the pandemic, and this necessity to engage critically with the technology that mediates this new world.
Right. Okay. I actually would like to key off of that a bit when you're talking about growing a new consciousness, and wanted to just start out with a question, actually, to go to Jacolby. You've talked before about the when you were a child, you had cancer for 3 years, and that for you during those years, the world of the gaming universes were your like Final Fantasy and Tomb Raider were sort of your place of solace. And I think that, we still, most of us, and particularly us in the art world who think about the tactile and the object based, the idea of the virtual is a sort of a cold, digital, unhuman space, is something, Jacolby, that you've tried to change and sort of to reimagine, and as a place of, as you said, of solace, or a place of pleasure, a place of comfort. and in part because it is the world that we and those who come after us will be living in. And so I wanted to just see if you could talk a bit about the virtual world, a new consciousness of the virtual world as a place of solace. I think you're muted again.
So I think it's quite like paradoxically the opposite, where the digital and the virtual world has grown into quite a demigod. It's like, it's a monolithic voice that's kind of a mask from all of us being on our iPhones, like basically, how we all operate on the algorithm and how the algorithm controls us in social media. We're all really guided by digital media in a very visceral way, and I recognize that. And so because digital media has been something that I found solace in, I try to work with it in a very haptic way, which is why I have to perform on the green screen, and I have a tactile relationship with rotoscoping everything in my animations and using graphite drawings in the work and 3D printing them and hand painting them, because at this point, we are all sort of cyborgian, anthropomorphized machines. We're all interwoven with the digital. I don't know if that answers that, but I mean, when I was a kid, I did, play Final Fantasy and max out all the levels as an escapism from, real life. But,
yeah. Mika, you had told me earlier about working on a new piece. I mean, your work in video is often about the feel of the human body and the feel of objects, the sound of objects, the sort of the corporeality of objects. But you were talking about working on a new piece that essentially follows a community of women who are connected all just virtually through some sort of a portal in a like a grooming store, or I forget what you told me, but I wanted to have you talk a bit about I guess thinking the way we're living right now. How is it changing your approach to what you think of as presenting the world?
Yeah, maybe to go back to the work of Sean, that part of the throat singing was filmed remotely. And I became really interested in working remotely in this way and connected. For a long time, I've connected to people online. And this idea of extending one's physicality into the web is something that's really interesting to me, in creating intimate relationships in that way. And filming in Tuva, the Daughters of Tuva, the band of the throat singers, in this way, and connecting with them and creating a lot of intimacy and magic through filming remotely. It was kind of an experiment.
Right, and you never met them in person, right?
Well, it turned to be that they were in the 25th anniversary world tour as I was researching them, and I ended up being performing in the back room of a bar in Brooklyn, 10 blocks from me. But that part made the remote, even stronger. I mean, because there was a 1 hour contact meeting before. And from then I wanted to film a whole movie remotely, and was interested in remote. I originally called it remote viewing, after the idea that you could actually, remote view. And the whole project was developed in collaboration with Myriad 2C, that we worked remotely on it with a lot of magic. So I do believe in that space of being able to connect in that way, also because of reducing footprint in the world too. I mean, for me, the motivation of working remotely was because I wanted to focus as much of my physical world locally and then my mental world globally. So the remote channels seem to be appropriate for that.
Right.
And what I'm working on now is called remote. So the new is called remote.
And it's real, and it's not just made remotely, but it's sort of situated in a world where the people know each other.
I gave up the idea, but it's interesting that the idea developed before the pandemic, and then as the pandemic happened, all these remote, it's called Camera in a Crew. All these like remote kits were developed, or developed quicker. Maybe they were developed anyway. They were sent. So when crew couldn't come, you would get this full-on like red camera or black magic camera, and a crew would operate it remotely. But in the end, it didn't make sense to film remotely. The project changed a little bit. So,
but you were saying, but the sort of the structure or the plot, as it were, it involves people who sort of really only know each other.
Exactly. Like the idea is to make it both ways, to connect to people remotely in that way, and also the plot is around 5 women. It happens in 2027. 5 women situated in different parts of the world connect through a South Korean dog grooming show and find this portal for like a pre-digital internet that would replace the digital internet by kind of a deeper pre-verbal internet. And it kind of looks at technology as a language and the idea that we maybe were able to communicate telepathically
Right.
Technology, you gain and you lose, and perhaps we lost this ability to communicate on a grander ways once we learned how to speak.
Right. I know, people talk about how during the Greek Dark Ages, the Greeks apparently lost all ability to write. Mm-hmm. Like they lost all ability to record speech. So you think, we have gone through periods in history where, we lose the ability to actually communicate in basic ways. So it's an interesting idea in that context. Emmanuel, I just wanted to, you sort of map the way the digital world changes community, for lack of a better word, like how society essentially builds up in different ways that wouldn't happen in the physical world, but happens in the virtual world. And in one interview I read, you were talking about, the blurred lines between actor and spectator, between emitter and receiver. And then also, and this sort of goes to your work about the mass shooting in Miami, about the performativity of horror and disaster. And so I was wondering if you could just say a little bit about that, what your interest in that approach. I mean, we're sort of talking now about the way to make the virtual world a more comfortable, livable space. But you're looking at another aspect of it, which is, how the physically violent world can be a part of the digital world. And I wondered if you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's really coming back again from this film that I did with the teenager. That's really the moment of realization for me that this revolution was actually sucking everything into it and transforming it a little bit. So my impression was that possibly in the past, people would, of course, look at something terrible, but they would not necessarily record themselves looking. So the function of the spectator has changed. In their mind, the experience of being the receiver had to be re-implanted into the tube. And that's somehow something of a bit different. It's different from the passivity of the experience of looking at the Berlin Wall falling from your TV. Actually, the whole model of the technology, the communication revolution, is to make the viewer become a participant and a willful participant, and also let's say a producer of his own reporting. So maybe a kind of tiny star. So everybody is a kind of a tiny star, and every experience is something worth to share and worth to ultimately, I guess, to market, because that somehow is the model. So I think that that's a dangerous loop. I mean, it's fascinating, of course, because it grows all this information and becoming instantaneous. We react on people reacting that are reacting on something. And in the end, it's becoming more the effect of something rather than the actual thing itself that is the real story. And this, I guess, is what's giving all this challenge to, to old notions such as democracy, for example, or facts or common cultural ground.
Right.
So it's interesting to see that this is also a product of the channel themselves. So the way that the machine is being built is encouraging this. So I don't know if it's answering your question, but these are things that really question me and fascinate me also, because you kind of, that's for now a few years that I've been really investigating and documenting things and transforming them and implementing them in my work that come from places that are intimately afar, or like they are at this extreme distance, but they also have this terrible proximity. So I'm a spectator in that game. So it's more like I'm trying to reflect on how to act responsibly with it, or how to reintroduce this conversation in my art.
Right. Alice, in the case of the crib, it's obviously it's not virtual, but it's bringing the tools of artificial intelligence and technology, into what you could arguably say is one of the most intimate spaces of human experience. And why is it that you think that crib and the image of a baby in that crib is so wildly divisive? And really quickly, before you answer that, I just wanted to say to the viewers that you can add a question. We'll take questions in a minute, and if you have questions, add them into the chat, or you can send them to feedback@nashersculpturecenter.org. But anyway, back to the sort of Kubrick image of the crib.
You're right. It's very, very Kubrickian. It could be on that spaceship hurtling into the beyond. It's a fascinating question, because I think there are so many reasons why it is such a disturbing image. And I think one is that, first of all, I don't have kids, so I am neutral on the snoo. I just believe whatever anyone tells me. So I think it's particularly interesting for me because, as a relatively opinionated person, it is a product on which I feel completely incapable of having a meaningful opinion. So it's fascinating to listen super objectively to people's responses. I knew it would prove contentious simply because anything, I think, to do with child rearing, because it's such an important responsibility for people. And if it's not taken seriously or not executed properly, though that's an incredibly subjective term when applied to that, it inevitably is going to spark discord and criticism and complaint and censoring. And I think that one possibility as to why it's so contentious is that the sort of logical explanation for where the snoo works is around either the frailties in the baby. It simply doesn't sleep well, it can't get to sleep, and so that becomes a huge problem for its parents. That is discomforting to think about, but also where it works is also linked to the frailties of parenting. All parents, like all people, get exhausted, they might become ill, they might have too many responsibilities at a particular time. That's arguably when something like the snoo could be helpful. But fundamentally, it's also taking away what friends with kids assure me is just a really precious, intimate experience, and suggesting that AI and algorithms can conduct it more efficiently, which is obviously deeply hurtful. So there are practical arguments for and against it, but fundamentally it's a hugely, utterly imponderable emotional quandary. And so that I'm fascinated by people's responses to design and different design innovations. And this has been a particularly divisive one, as you said.
Right. And do you think that, the last 6 months have shown us a preview, probably, of what living more virtually and more in the world of AI and more in the world of the algorithm will feel like? It's not just that we have Zoom and the ability to see each other from around the world that we're using now more often. It really is sort of putting us in this space of understanding how we and our children and our grandchildren will live, and provoking even more fear of that world being an inhospitable place, or a place of separateness and isolation. And in talking to design people and designers and other design writers, do you have a sense of this sort of fear that our immersion in the digital world has been provoked by the COVID crisis, that it's been ramped up? Or I guess alternatively, people who really embrace it, this is the way, it's a good way to live. It's preferable in many cases to getting on a subway and being in a skyscraper somewhere.
Many would argue that. I mean, I think as in this, as in so many aspects of our lives, COVID and the pandemic, lockdown, the ensuing economic crisis hasn't necessarily suddenly invented new developments. It's accelerated the development of lots of changes that were simmering away in our lives for a long time, but have really roared ahead during the crisis. What it has also done is, I think, show both the benefits and the extraordinary dangers of so many aspects of digital technology, particularly artificial intelligence, neuromorphic computing, deep learning software, these extraordinary powerful technologies that are increasingly ubiquitous in our world, particularly in the public domain, and will undoubtedly control more and more aspects of our lives in future. Now, like any technology, if their applications are designed sensitively, intelligently, in a generous and open-minded, public-spirited way, they can be hugely beneficial. If they're not, they can be catastrophic. And it's fascinating to see how in Southeast Asian countries, who obviously experienced the brunt of the SARS pandemic a decade ago, and introduced a lot more digital surveillance and also tracking and tracing systems, knowing that should another pandemic come along, they would then be better equipped to cope with them. Mm-hmm. They have tended to be more efficient at managing the pandemic. So that is a sort of very positive argument for allowing more and more of these technologies to exercise increasing power in our lives. There's also the chilling realization that many of the countries that have been most efficient at deploying them have been repressive dictatorships. So there's clearly a link between the two. And in countries like my own and the US, where the management of the crisis has generally been deplorable, we have seen what happens when these systems are badly designed, poorly implemented, and shoddily orchestrated, and they cause chaos, confusion, and even worse, sort of destruction and death. So I think it raises the imperative for design to be deployed as intelligently, as sensitively as possible. And that's only going to happen if people become more aware of it, better informed about it, better able to make judgments and to argue for and against them. So in other words, to take their design destiny into their
own hands.
And it's also fascinating that if you think of the sort of first waves of digital technology, in general, they liberated us, they empowered us, they liberated us to do something as simple as work from home rather than trudging to that skyscraper every day, but also they tended to encourage eclecticism, eccentricity. So if you think of something as basic as doing a Google search, if you and I clicked on Google, same interface, with the same question, we may end up with roughly the same answer, but the path we choose to get there by skipping from reference to reference, site to site, image to image, would be completely different. So our understanding of the issues would be different because they'd be influenced by that. But just as during the industrial age, standardization constrained us in so many ways, artificial intelligence is even worse. It's sort of the enemy of intimacy because it is only determined by data and how the application of that data is designed. And so much of that data is binary in terms of its assumptions about our gender identity, our ethnicity. You know, if I put it this way, a recent survey in the UK showed that the only people with a 90% plus likelihood of being accurately identified by a biometric surveillance system in somewhere like an airport or a train station are white cis males without facial hair. So you, Randy, thanks to your beard, would be at a disadvantage. You're probably down to sort of 80% plus.
Right.
If you're have any gender identity other than cis male, you're automatically less likely to be identified. And if you're a person of color, that also diminishes your chances. So white cis females are below 50% and women of color are below 40%. So when those sort of crass misassumptions are made and so many authoritarian decisions are made about our lives, our liberty, and so many aspects of them, that's a very dangerous situation to be in. So hopefully our experience in COVID will alert us to those dangers and make us wiser about ensuring that they're avoided in future.
Right. You know, we're about to run over time, but I wanted, this is a question for any of the three artists. Has this last 6 or 7 months more fully immersed in a digital world giving you optimism or the opposite, a sort of, you know, dread of where we're headed, or a mix of both? And anybody who has an answer to that, I would like to hear it. Wait, Jacolby, are you talking? You're muted again. We keep losing your voice.
Hi. So I was saying the past 6 months have made me hyper aware of, like, I guess that I'm being controlled by the algorithm that, you know, like has been, you know, theoretically, you know, when you think about Cambridge Analytica and like big tech and how they can kind of collect our data and control like our POV via our phone, I'm super like skeptical of my own consciousness because I'm so attached to technology that I kind of constantly feel like I'm in this ambiguous, you know, like I don't trust myself anymore. So it's not necessarily optimism, but I'm just trying to like get by. I'm trying to like balance my level of haptic and visceral and real experiences versus my screen time, because I don't want to get lost in that matrix. But that's how I feel since the pandemic has happened, especially when the civil unrest happened and that crazy moment in May and June, and everyone sort of went into this monolithic mode of protest. I never saw the human voice collapse into like one form as much as in my entire life, and it made me incredibly cynical. So that's how I feel.
Yeah. And you talked about like not wanting to be a part of that matrix, but do you have a sort of a hope that that's escapable? I mean, I guess the really pessimistic view would be that there's no way to escape.
There's no way,
already.
but I try not to click on recommended links ever.
Oh, okay.
I try to search for my own things because I feel like the suggestions on the internet literally are like sort of the constellation for like brainwashing. It's like an Orwellian 1984 strategy, I think, you know? So yeah, I try to like make my own decisions as much as possible.
What, Mika, what's your feeling in terms of optimism or its opposite, the way we're living now?
It's both, right? It's like dystopia, utopia. So it's like, I don't know if they, but I mean, a couple of observations. One is how, because I'm upstate and this, where the real routine becomes so same and without that many happenings, and then the richness of the life I have through the screen. So the real becomes less real, and then the virtual becomes a lot more alive and noisy, and where every day is.
And for you mean
that changes.
The real becomes more constrained just because you're in the same house every day. You're not going anywhere. You're making a path from the kitchen to the office and back, and so.
Exactly. Where online is where everything happens, or through the screen. So there's like, we're craving for that multiple kind of sounds and information and all that.
Right. And Emmanuel?
I mean, I think, and it's like, what happens to the real? So it's that the virtual is going to get bigger. Then how do you separate, and what happens to the real? Like, I guess that's a certain kind of direction that could be interesting. How do they work together?
Yeah.
Your physical space. Right.
And Emmanuel, because you explore in some ways some of the darker sides of this, of what the virtual world does to just, sort of political structures and community and then, violence in the real world coming out of that, where do you stand on that question?
Yeah, but I mean, there's a few images that come to my mind. I think that we had this is a bit of a moment of like in the naked lunch, that everybody see what's at the end of the fork. That's a moment where we see like the technology that was already there, but some taboo has been lifted under the bestiality of enthusiasm, for the lack of. We needed to implement fast things, try things, and we just roll into this new place, but we were there already, actually. So that's my feeling. So we, for I guess a few years, I was using this rhetorical thing, telling to people that in my work I'm questioning maybe this moment where the shifting relation between reality and virtual world tend to tip in the direction of the virtual world, because I like to picture it as a kind of a wonderful glass tower where you can elevate yourself in all these different stairs and discover all these different worlds, while the ground floor is becoming this kind of gritty and monolithic place that end up to be the metro station or the airport or the workspace. So I was using that as a kind of rhetoric things, not believing it myself, but actually this has been the moment where I truly believe that we've tipped on the other side. We went into it fully. So it's a very defining moment, I think, a very important moment. We've just opened a new, the door of a new world, and there's no turning back. So we'll see how this technology, I think I agree with Alice that it's all about the ethics of how they will be implemented. Because we will not, of course, will not come back. The distance, it's interesting also to think about the distance of the world that has become like overwhelming again. Like the USA is far away again; it's unreachable to me.
Right.
But at the same time, we're doing this, so we've really, enter the black hole somehow and see where it leads us. But so I have between fear and excitement about it, I guess. So there's a sense of awfulness into the situation. Of course, it's a tragedy also, but right. It will. I think we have just entered a new era, perhaps like I haven't seen before in my lifetime. So
right, there's a question from the audience for Jacolby, and you talked a bit about this earlier, Jacolby, but the person is asking, could you talk a bit more about the erotic imagery within your work and how it might have new levels of meaning in a moment like this when the physical connection in our worlds has been abstracted or not even permitted.
Well, for one thing, I want to say the erotic imagery of my work was always like a meta narrative rather than literal like exploration of like, I guess, queer desire. I kind of thought about, I used to always juxtapose the erotic imagery with like climate change images or something with like something more. I always juxtapose the erotic imagery with something to kind of give it context. And what metaphorically it means for me to have that is like when you notice in my videos, there's always like a slave master dialectic. There's always an S&M aesthetic. And that's because I'm using the aesthetic of sadomasochism or labor to kind of just talk about, I guess, a sort of like chain of carnality that keeps us embedded in the algorithm that like assist, I guess, civilization's decline. I hope that wasn't too convoluted and heady.
Well, I was going to say, like, and has this present moment, since we've all been dealing with the virus, changed your thinking about the use of or the the employment of erotic imagery, and how you mix it with everything you were just talking about?
Well, anytime there's a pandemic, like when the AIDS crisis began in the 80s, like artworks that employed erotic imagery had a much more charged impact for audiences. So naturally, my erotic imagery has that kind of extreme signifier. But like now my piece, Blessed Avenue, which is basically shows, 5 kind of like matrix factories of figures in a kind of erotic deployment, like controlling each other, next to a second channel that shows this Pegasus form flying over burning forest fires and ice glaciers melting and bombs in Syria. Like for me, it's about, that piece definitely has enhanced its meaning because now we're really becoming conscious of like our body as a bioterrorist threat. And the body is such a like loaded, like I guess, touch has become such a kinetic force now. I don't know. I don't even feel like I'm like getting blurry in my conversation, but yes, it definitely has changed.
Right. Well, and I guess that's the other side of this isn't just that we've been forced into this greater digital existence, but the very act of touch, the very act of being near, of a real human body being near another human body has now become charged, has become sort of radioactive. So, both of those things are at work right now in the way we think. And I do, wonder in artists' work, how this will feel, how it'll be processed, 5 years from now or 10 years from now, because it does seem like a seismic change.
Yeah.
Well, we have gone over by about 15 minutes, and I think we could continue on here, but I think we should probably wrap it up. So I would like to thank you all for being here from all of your parts of the world, and I enjoyed this and was happy to be a part of it. So thank you all for tuning in out there and listening to this, and I hope that I personally hope that we all see each other a little bit more in person in the near future.
Thank you.
So thanks a lot. Thanks again. Okay. Bye.
Bye.